Stefan, thank you for receiving me at your office. We are in Friedensau, where you are a teacher of systematic theology. You are an author about the history of the church, but you are also very interested and a deep thinker and researcher about the relationship between the Adventist church and the other churches. How did you come to this field of learning?
This field is an amazing field, and I chose it because in my first research, in my first major book, which concerns Tanzania, where I stayed for 6 years, I realized that the church in many contexts in the world inevitably has a lot to do with other churches. Like here in Tanzania, where I studied these phenomena, we grew from a very small church, of course, 100 years ago, to a majority in many regions. So when you are a majority, you have to relate to those others around and to the minorities. So we are the major church, 50,000 people in one place in some areas. So inevitably you will relate to others. And I realized that in the Adventist church this topic was not studied. There were some activities, significant activities, but it was a kind of gap. And then as a mission scholar, I was originally doing mission studies, and going to systematic theology, it was the ideal thing in between.
We need to come first to some concepts, some terms that we are going to use during our conversation. Let's not call it an interview. Especially, we need to differentiate, before coming to your book, between interreligious dialogue, interconfessional or denominational dialogue, and ecumenism. Could you please help us to try to understand the three concepts that we have?
Yeah. In fact, they are all related somehow, especially in people's minds, but in reality, the relationship between the churches and the dialogue between the churches is quite different from the relationship between a Christian church and non-Christian religions. So there's a big difference, because as Christians, we can always rely on the same Bible, or the Bible, and the traditional formulations of doctrine, and discuss these. With Muslims or Hindus, that doesn't work. So that's a big difference. Interreligious dialogue is when we meet Muslims or Buddhists and we try to find not common ground, but perhaps common interest. With other Christians, we share many things, but we also have differences. And so sometimes churches decide that we should discuss about these differences and try to see where we can understand each other better. And then ecumenism is a hot topic sometimes, because some churches or some Christians think we should all unite much more than we usually do. And this is called normally ecumenism.
Okay, so you have just published a book about 1 year ago, and it's called Adventist Interchurch Relations. I'm going to show it to the people that are watching us. What made you write the book? You said that there was not enough or not much research about the issue, but you had a starting point.
Yes.
There was a moment when you thought, I'm going to write about this.
Yes, right. So the Adventist Church has been in existence for more than 150 years. In this history, Adventists have met Christians of other backgrounds in various ways and have tried to communicate with them in various ways, and often also cooperated with them in some ways, but not in others. And this is a fascinating history, because the discussion about how we ought to relate to these other Christians or how we should not has been going on in various ways. And nobody had researched this before, so I decided that's my topic. I needed to do a habilitation, which is a postdoctoral dissertation, and it was broad enough and interesting enough to do such a study.
So let's go to the history of the church and the relations with other churches. Let's start from the beginning. You presented the trends during time, so the different approaches that the church had towards, especially Christians, of course. We were talking about the United States, Christian environment where the church began. And you started to say that we were very keen on meeting other people, especially because we had a new message to bring them. That the first approach was mission, the relation.
Yes. So it is fascinating, but often forgotten, that the Millerites, the first Adventists, before the Seventh-day Adventist Church was born, the Millerites were an interdenominational revival meeting. Revival movement. Yes. So they had these meetings where people of different churches came together and just confirmed to each other that we are waiting for the Lord who is coming soon. They even said, which is funny at the time, we also invite Catholics to join us. Well, there were very few Catholics at the time and they didn't join them, but they were so open to proclaim that Christ is coming soon that to them belonging to one church or another didn't make a difference. Now, this of course didn't continue because, as we know, this movement split up in various groups.
But of course that the approach from the church point of view towards other Christian churches during the 19th century until the 80s, it was missiologic at the first place. But then the 80s brought, of course, the Sunday law movement, and the church had to shift its approach. Could you explain what happened then, and how did it shift the approach from the church towards other religions?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the very earliest Adventists, before the denomination was founded, were quite hesitant to relate to other churches at all, because they thought the end is coming so soon, we just have to bring them the Sabbath and our doctrines, and then time will be over. In the 1870s, however, meeting with Seventh-day Baptists, Adventists for the first time realized that we also can have common causes with Christians who don't belong to us, especially because we all keep the Sabbath together with the Seventh-day Baptists. So there was a very cordial relationship between Seventh-day Adventists and Seventh-day Baptists. And still in the 1870s and 1880s, there was also a growing awareness that other churches doing mission in the world do something that is worthwhile and that advances God's kingdom. Now, alongside was a development that made church leaders to be more hesitant towards other churches because, especially as you mentioned, Sunday law attends agitation in North America, where non-Sunday keepers would have been either persecuted or at least disprivileged. And so there was more distance developing between Adventists and other churches.
And do you feel that? Well, I don't ask. Do you feel, because I read it that was present in the church relations with other churches until more or less the middle of the century, 19th century now. So that distance, let's call it this way. And what happened then? How do you feel that during the 19th century? How was the trend of this relationship?
Yeah, it was a kind of paradoxical relationship, because in one way, when you read what James White and others wrote at the time, they emphasized that spiritually all Christians, all true Christians are one. But spiritual unity and the reality out there in the world are not the same thing. So you can feel connected to another Christian in a spiritual way because perhaps you pray together or you experience something great in your everyday life, but still you don't organize as a church together. And so there was this rift that deepened during the 1890s, especially because of Sunday law agitation.
Mm-hmm. And you propose a concept of the kind of relationship that we have towards our other Christians, especially. You propose this term, non-institutional unity.
Yeah.
So it means that we don't engage in declarations and statements and approaches in which we mingle in a very institutional way with other denominations, but finally we engage with them, and we have a unity in terms of purpose, of mission, according to the view, the perspective of each one. Would you like to formalize the concept?
Yes. Well, in fact, one of the aims of this study was not only to look into Adventist history, but also to study all the options of Christians relating to each other. In the mainstream ecumenical movement, there are more or less 3 options that are discussed and that are promoted, but in reality there are 8. I found that there are 8. And there's also both a theological basis for this, which I can't discuss in detail, but and there's a social scientific basis for this. So there are 8 types of relationships, and when you observe the churches, what they are doing, and also what we are doing as a denomination, all these options are there. But the interesting thing is Adventists have engaged basically in those 5 that the others are not engaging in. So not the strong institutional unity, reunification, not the World Council of Churches with a council approach and, as you said, declaration, organization, and also not this formal recognition of others and then trying to share the pulpit or have common communion and things like this. This we haven't done because it would presuppose that we try to be like them and they try to be like us. It's more a compromise approach. And this is hard for Adventists to do compromises. We don't want that. But we want unity like other Christians.
But you also quoted some scholars that found in the Adventist approach on this kind of dialogue, on relationship, as a reference.
Yeah,
so you see other people watching the Adventist movement as a reference in terms of a will to do to search for unity, in a non-institutional way, and they appreciate that, right?
Sure. Yeah, and this is significant because the world is much bigger than the World Council of Churches. The World Council of Churches has many member churches, of course, and it's the most well-known face of ecumenism. But it only comprises perhaps 1/4 of Christianity. The Roman Catholic Church is not there. Most evangelicals and Pentecostals are not there. We are not there. So there's really an end to what those movements have been able to achieve. And so there's a lot of talk about unity, but they don't really achieve it.
You also proposed some areas, some fields in which we have relations with society and with other churches, like social responsibility. And we always undervalue it as a means to engage without having any doctrinal kind of a commitment.
Yes, right. And take, for instance, the Bible societies. From the early 20th century, Adventists were strongly involved in various national Bible societies. I mean, this is kind of self-evident that Adventists support the distribution of the Bible, but it's also something where our representatives met people from other traditions, from other churches, and where we cooperated. So there are many fields of cooperation where we have cooperated without telling the world, oh, we want to be ecumenical. It's okay. It doesn't need to be on an agenda to speak about this all the time.
So we could say, finalizing this topic about the church, we could say that we are engaging with society, with other religions, with other denominations, and we are doing it through history. Without committing what we stand for and especially our mission.
Yes, without compromising the theology that we have. And I would even argue that it flows out of our theology because we wait for the kingdom of God. We cannot ignore that some of the kingdom of God is taking place here and now, so we have to participate in it. But the kingdom of God is not an institution that we create, so relating to other churches is not necessarily building up a kingdom on earth.
So leaving the Adventist reality right now, a little bit back, what do you think are the main trends in terms of interreligious dialogue, interconfessional dialogue and ecumenism right now?
Well, in fact, this topic about ecumenism and interchurch relations is losing importance because we have the influx of so many migrants from different countries where other religions altogether are the majority. So in many countries now, the dialogue with Muslims is the major topic. And that's a different reality altogether. We can't really take insights from here and directly transfer them to inter-religious dialogue. We have to be careful there because we are so different from Muslims or Buddhists and the like. That's one thing. The second thing, with regard to religious liberty, I would say that depends so much on the country because these are national issues. A nation can decide to have a law that is more restrictive or less restrictive. As Christians, sometimes we can cooperate very well on religious liberty, and that's an opportunity, I would argue. And as a church, we have demonstrated in history that on the line of religious liberty, we are very able
it's one of our main banners.
Yes, to cooperate with others in a positive way without giving away our identity.
Mm-hmm. So Stefan, thank you so much. I would like to invite you to leave a final remark about the importance of this matter and maybe invite people to be interested in it.
Good. Well, there's a famous communication scholar. His name is Paul, and he once said, "You cannot not communicate." The same is true with relationships. There's a human being over there. You cannot not relate to him or her. You have to relate somehow. And similarly, between churches or religious bodies, somehow every action that you do or do not do is a kind of relationship. So as disciples of Jesus, as members of the kingdom of God, I think we cannot ignore other people by saying that they don't exist or we don't relate. We will always relate. And if we relate, we can relate in a meaningful way, in the way how Jesus would relate.